Hello, everybody. It's Luke with Responsibility for Freedom. Going to do another rant today. We got to do it. We got to talk about Islamic Muslim apologists, people who say they're moderate Muslims, people who say they're not all Muslims are terrorists and not all Muslims are bad, and we can't go around saying this, and we can't condemn a whole group of people for the actions of a few. I'm going to talk about this specifically, and it came up because I was watching Majad Nawaz, who's a radio commentary. I believe he's an author. He was he calls himself an ex-Muslim extremist who ended up serving prison time and became, as he says, de-radicalized in prison, of all places. So he thought that an Islamic caliphate, Sharia law should be implemented around the world, and he was willing to commit violence to institute that perfect Islamic state that Muslims, profess to say that the world will be a better place, as commanded in the Quran and Hadiths, the example of Muhammad himself. So he rejects those ideas. He rejects the violence, and he openly talks about it continuously, as do other Muslims who identify as Muslims. And what I couldn't reconcile and understand is, why would you continue to call yourself a Muslim? And I'm going to explain this because we have no problem condemning whole groups of people. We don't. Educated, I think smart, educated, left, progressive thinking people reject bad ideas on wholesale and have no problem denouncing such and pointing out the fallacies of people, of everybody of a certain group. And I'll give you a few examples. Nazis, we have no problem condemning all Nazis, or alt-right people, or right-wing activists. We have no problem rejecting religious zealots of other religious groups. We have no problem condemning the Ku Klux Klan in its entirety. So we have no problem condemning anybody of these groups. Now, I want you to just consider this, and Majad Nawaz, who continues to call himself a Muslim, yet denouncing the fundamental tenets of the belief. I'm just going to point out the absurdity of it. I want you to objectively think about what I'm saying here. Would you sit down with a member of the Ku Klux Klan and listen to him say, hey, we don't all, advocate for genocide against other races. We, clearly not, you can't believe that every member of the Ku Klux Klan went out and did something, right? I mean, there got to be moderate Ku Klux Klan members. Well, that's funny. We don't tolerate that. We don't. You said, well, you're a part of a group, and the fundamental tenets of this group is things that most people reject in its entirety. So you wouldn't tolerate it. I mean, you would laugh that person out of the room. Now I want you to imagine the Nazis sitting there. Hey, come on, not all Nazis participated in violence and running concentration camps. And, well, that would be true, wouldn't it? You can't possibly believe that everybody was participating in that or even agreed with it. But if they identified themselves as such, you would lump them in with the worst of that group's offenses. We do it. The alt-right. Could you imagine sitting down with somebody in the alt-right and them saying, I'm a moderate? Not everybody believes in violence. And we're dentists and we're doctors and we're cab. That argument, would be just totally rejected. And then we go over to the Muslim world and the Islamic State, and we have the same stupid conversation. If someone, I don't care what they're doing or how nice or eloquently they speak, continue to identify themselves as a Muslim, by definition, that means you are a follower of Muhammad. And that means you accept that he was the final true prophet of God, that everything he said that others wrote down in the Quran, in the Hadiths, was the manifestation of the last true word of God. By definition, that's what it means. What do you think it means to be a Christian? It's a simple thing. It means a follower of Christ. So if you're a follower of Christ, then you would accept the teachings that Christ gave out, right? And this is something I understand, the hardship that somebody would have to give up something they were born into or indoctrinated into, because I was indoctrinated into a religious. Probably the most, next to Islam, the next most repressive religious ideology there is Jehovah's Witness. I was born into that. Now, when you're born into something, you really have no choice. You can't. You're not developed enough at 4 or 5 years old when you're brought down to church 4 times a week. When you're taught to go door to door. When you're taught you're saving the world. When you're taught that this is the only true religion. You really have. You ask questions and you get answers. And as a kid, you can question these answers, but you're always told, and then you're told that this is the one true religion. So when you're born into something and understand that that's how most Muslims are indoctrinated, then it is really, really hard to reconcile that and give up what you believe to be true. It's the hardest thing to do. But at some point you grow up, at some point you start to question. And what drove me to say that this religion is garbage was because I looked at the founding fathers of the religion, like how it started. These people were clearly humans, fallible. Brother Russell was what they called him was a Freemason. Dad was a Freemason. He was charged and arrested for selling holy wheat. It became apparent when you look back that no, this isn't the true religion of God, that the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses are enlightened by God. When you start to look at the decisions they made, how that governing body came to be a part of it, it just, you realize, no, these are just a bunch of humans that started a religion. And then you start to look at what they teach, and it's not supported by scripture in some ways. And to let it go is hard. But I don't run around professing to be a Jehovah's Witness because I was born into it, and then start to say, well, I reject all these ideas, but we could still have, I could still call myself a Jehovah's Witness. No, it doesn't work. You can't say I'm a moderate Nazi. You can't say I'm a moderate Ku Klux Klan member. You can't say I'm a moderate alt-right. You either accept it or you don't. There's no middle ground. I mean, think about people who left Scientology. Do you think they run around? Do you think there's one of them running around saying, well, I'm a Scientologist. I just don't believe in Xenu. No. You either believe the crap that you're taught or you don't. There's no such thing as a moderate Muslim. You say, well, some of them are extremists. No, they're not. ISIS, which I think anybody would agree is the most extreme faction, they're not doing anything that isn't required, demanded, or an example of what Muhammad himself did. They're doing exactly what the Muslim faith says. In fact, those are the real Muslims. Everybody else, they're kind of supporting it. Like, think about it. If you go to the mosque, all mosques around the world are recruitment centers teaching hatred. There's nothing else to teach. Look, you can't make chicken soup out of chicken shit. And the Muslim faith and the Islamic ideology is chicken shit. And if you have come to the conclusion that I don't like this, and this about it, but I'm going to continue to call myself a Muslim, despite the fact that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old, that he beat his wives, had multiple wives, and slaves, and concubines, which is sex slaves. He advocated for it, wrote down, had others write down how to deal with that, and what the rules were. You have all of that he's done. He beheaded women's husbands and children in front of them, and then took those women as wives and sex slaves and gave other women to his men. He surrounded villages and tribes and murdered them all the men, anyone who had puberty. So he would literally look at their genitals and see if they had hair, and then he would kill them, and then take their wives and their daughters as sex slaves and wives for himself and his men, like I said. That's what he did. And this is the true prophet of God, and you're going to reject that and then continue to say you're a Muslim? I mean, let that sink in. Majad Nawaz, you're a hypocrite. Anybody else who says, well, I'm a Muslim, then you're accepting those things. You have to. That's who Muhammad was. An illiterate 40-year-old goat herder who was probably sick of his mediocre, pathetic life, who was a complete sadist and degenerate. And he decided, I don't know how, but I'll just tell people I'm a prophet. Well, for 10 years, he only was able to recruit about 12 people. So that didn't go well. And that's where the saying, you can't be a prophet in your own city. So he got thrown out of Mecca. They had enough of his shit. They threw him out because he's an idiot. Then he goes over to Majiz, I believe, the other city there. And for some reason, people started believing his garbage. And the minute he had enough followers, All the peace and love he was spewing went right out the window, and the murder and mayhem began. And you sit around in this day and age and profess to be an intelligent human being and say you're a Muslim. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's garbage. We have to treat people who profess to be Muslim like we do Nazis, alt-right, extremist groups, Ku Klux Klan, Scientologists. Anybody who's a member of a radical, whacked-out cult needs to be condemned. Now, I'm not advocating violence. That's their gig. We don't have to be violent. Like, we're not violent against Ku Klux Klan members. Like, we're not hunting them down, going to their houses and trying to burn them out. But we publicly shame the idea. And I think we're pretty successful at that. Not a lot of people put on a Ku Klux Klan hat and walk around because they get, justifiably so, some harsh treatment. So we as a society got to say, no, we're not accepting you. You say you're a Muslim, okay, well then basically you're saying I'm not a Muslim, so you're willing to kill me. And if they say to you, well, I don't believe in that, then why are you professing to be a Muslim? When you leave, you can't reject parts of it. You can't. It is who he is. If someone says I'm a Christian, that means they're a follower of Christ. Now, just imagine someone said to you, well, who's practicing and doing everything Muhammad did. Has sex with children. By the way, Muhammad, just not that it's bad enough that he did those things, and a lot of people keep making excuses for them. I don't get it. If you have sex with a 9-year-old, that you're a pedophile. Anybody who's had a child who has a 9-year-old child knows you don't want them to be sexualized. As a parent, you're supposed to protect your children. That's what you do. You would never accept that. But Muhammad had sex with a dead woman. Yeah. When I tell people this, they think I'm making it up. They think get to Googling, man. He had sex with his dead wife, and it's written down in the Quran that it's okay, from Muhammad's own words, to have sex 6 hours after your wife's dead. He was at his wife's burial. She was in the ground. He climbed in there, lifted up her burial robes, and proceeded to have sex with her in front of his followers. His followers said, "What are you doing?" They were shocked, rightfully so. He says, "Oh, don't worry, I'm helping her through her dark space," basically saying helping her through hell, and it's okay. If we can't reject that man for what he was, a complete piece of shit, then you understand what I'm saying, okay? I think I got the point across. You should figure this out, that we don't need to apologize. If somebody goes to the mosque and everybody's taught this, yeah, not everybody's going to act on it. Why? Because we all have morals that you're born with, and you can't take them away. I'm going to give you guys an example. At the end of World War II, the U.S. military did an audit on their frontline combat troops and found that only 20% of them were doing all the killing. Now, you might not believe that, but look it up. And that's from the military's own audit. They thought this was a major problem. Well, of course it's a major problem. I mean, they won the war. And remember, there was no draft. Everybody who went there volunteered and believed the cause was right, but yet couldn't bring themselves to doing the killing and the mayhem that needed to be done. And maybe that's why they didn't have as much PTSD then, when those returning troops from World War II came back. Because I want you to think about it, the people who were doing the killing morally justified it one way or the other. And there's a small segment of the population who can do that, apparently. Now, by Vietnam, the U.S. military got that up to 98%. But look at the fallout. Look what happened, the PTSD rates. Back in World War II, they call it shell shock. It didn't happen a lot. Because not everybody was doing the killing. But now up in Vietnam, everybody was doing the killing because they changed the training. Well, now you got these major mental issues because we humans don't want to do that on a whole. And so the same thing goes on in any wild fanatical group. Not everybody's going to want to sign up for the most extreme part of it. But the rest of it, the people who go there, donate money, profess to be part of that group, all contribute to that ideology in its entirety. So if you profess to be one, you are one. And the most extreme aspect of that group, that's what you're associating yourself with. It's no different in any other situation. And I'm going to say it again. You can't make chicken soup out of chicken shit. And Islam is nothing but chicken shit. And it needs to be rejected in its entirety. And it needs to be seen for what it was. Muhammad was a garbage human being. And the fact that billions, hundreds of millions, over a billion people advocate and believe in that, that's a major freaking problem. All right, that's it for today. Keep it free.